软件我打在屏幕上方，可以在 App 上叫车或者电话约车。第二站，我们从伦敦来到牛津，提前1个月预定了牛津大学宿舍。暑假时，住校客人不仅能够在哈利波特同款食堂吃早餐，还可以在傍晚进入对游客关闭的基督学院。房间干净整洁，提供洗漱用品。详细预订攻略可以翻翻我们过去的笔记。这是世界顶级学府，走进不同的学院，感受到浓烈的学术氛围。在这样的环境中，很容易激发一个人对未来的思考，非常适合带着孩子去感受，给未来种下一颗种子。
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show